I hope there's some people here and that you've come to hear us talking about enabling Azure AD Premium for the secure, productive enterprise. My name is Paul Captainino. I work for Oxford Computer Group, and you can see, I hope, my email address on the slide there, first name dot surname at oxfordcomputergroup.com. I am a senior consultant for Oxford Computer Group here in the UK, where I'm based. And I'm also the lead trainer for OCG Learning, which is the training arm of Oxford Computer Group. Here you can see some ways of getting hold of us if you need to. If what you're after is consultancy, then on Twitter you should be able to find us at OCG US Official. If what you're after is training courses, then you should be able to find us on Twitter at OCG Learning. Facebook, we're all on oxfordcomputergroup.com, and on LinkedIn you can search for Oxford Computer Group US and OCG Learning, and you'll find me, but plus of course the whole of the team who can help you with anything that you require from us, and hopefully we can give you some help in your implementations. So my plan today is that we are going to talk about the Azure AD and Azure AD Premium. I found that we spoke to a lot of our customers, and particularly when we're talking to the IT staff at our customers, and a lot of people ask the question, for example, yes, we've got Azure AD Premium, or we're planning Azure AD, or perhaps Office 365 or some other options available in the cloud. But A, why are we doing it? And B, if it has been implemented, well, what next? And so my plan today is to have a chat to you folks about well, exactly that, what's next. So I'm going to start by just asking a simple poll. Now, I must confess, I'm not very good with this software, so let's just see if I can make this work. So I want to ask this particular poll, if anybody's out there, I'm kind of trying to encourage you to interact with me. And I have opened up this poll called, well, we're basically asking whether you have implemented Azure AD Premium or you're intending to very soon. And of course, that's basically the kind of thing that we need to know before we even start talking. It turns out none of you are interested, then what's the point? Okay, but luckily, at least some of you are. Okay, so thank you for that, folks. Let's close that down. So we've got a lot of basically thinking about it is the biggest implementation. So the best way I think to start this discussion is to really talk about what Azure AD is, and of course we're really talking about the Premium Edition in this case. Azure AD is available in several different editions. The Premium Edition is really for organizations that are, we would call them enterprises. You know, slightly larger organizations would be considering Azure AD Premium. But in the Azure AD that Microsoft has as a directory right now, we're talking like 2 billion authentications a day. So when they built normal on-premise Active Directory, what we're going to call AD from now on. When they built AD, this was talking more like hundreds, maybe thousands simultaneously, but not anything like 2 billion. So Microsoft, when they decided they needed a cloud directory, they liked the name Active Directory, so of course we stick to the name Active Directory. And the plan is that they needed, faster implementation of the infrastructure. I think the rule is something like 250 milliseconds. If something takes more than 250 milliseconds, then your attention is already going somewhere else. So when you're authenticating 2 billion users a day, then obviously you need to be able to do that pretty swiftly. And not there's anything wrong, of course, with the on-premise implementation of Active Directory main services, but it can't authenticate that many users that quickly. So it was a kind of a good rethink about how things should work. And of course, on-premise AD, always drawn like this as a triangle to indicate domains, is you implement your domain controllers, you place your domain controllers in the right place around your organization to handle the authentications that you require. With Azure AD, which of course is on cloud, Microsoft have built or have used existing data centers all around the world to provide the infrastructure that the users can use, your companies can implement tenancies in, to be able to host the same kind of identity providing that Active Directory does. And then, so in each of these data centers, there are, for want of a better term, a bunch of pods, which are basically a fabric switch sitting on top of processors or networks or disks that can lightning fast provide information back to somebody somewhere around the world when they're making a connection to this system. When Microsoft first implemented it, 2013, they then provided a little interface on top. The guy who was one of the leading architects of this interface, a guy called Dave Cutler, you may have heard of him. He was the guy who wrote, I don't know if he wrote, it's strictly true, but one of the lead developers for VMS and for Windows NT when it first came out. He's one of the chief architects at Microsoft, and he built a front end that could lightning fast switch to any of these data centers, and then lightning fast, of course, use the fabric switches in those data centers to switch to your data that's in the pods. Each of the data centers includes 3 copies of your data, and if any of the switches fail, or the hard disks or the processing fails, the fabric switches can switch you very quickly elsewhere. When Dave Cutler invented this interface, he called it RDFE. I don't know if you've come across this term, the Red Dog front end. And the idea of the Red Dog front end, of course, like I said, lightning fast, switch you to one of the data centers where your data is, based on who you are and what call you made. And then the fabric switches, of course, then route you to the right data. And so the idea is if something fails in one of these pods, the fabric switches can quickly switch you to either another pod or another location in the same pod. And the RDFE can switch you to different data centers around the world where your data is. Rather than, so, I mean, there still exists the concept of like domain controllers and the domain controllers with all your information in, but they're not really there in that way as they were in the on-premise AD. So the Red Dog front end would quickly switch you to the right place. By the way, why it's called the Red Dog front end is a vaguely interesting story related, so I'm told, to the fact that the team, including Dave, were driving to or from Redmond discussing this new switching capability. And they drove past a bar called the Pink Poodle. And said, oh, what a great name. And so they were going to call it the Pink Poodle front end, but they decided that wasn't professional enough and renamed it Red Dog. Is that an apocryphal? Is it a true story? I don't know. Is it a myth? I don't know. But that's what everybody says about where that Red Dog front end comes from. Microsoft, by the way, since then, 2013, 2014, started perhaps better packaging the different compute or disk or networky bits of Azure together, and actually now the interface calls itself ARM, or Azure Resource Manager. So you access these resources via either the Red Dog front end, which still exists, it's still there when you point at the portals that are available to enable this. You might get the Red Dog front end, although that's slowly going away and is now being replaced by the Azure Resource Manager. The Azure Resource Manager better manages the resources together and is quick and easy. And what you do is you use the portals that are available to you, which we'll discuss in a second, to purchase a subscription. Okay, this might be sometimes called a tenancy. We use the word subscription and tenancy to mean different things, but basically your organization purchases a tenancy, and when you do, in that one tenancy that you've purchased, you typically connect up, you provide an email address, and you provide a credit card. By the way, Microsoft promised never to charge that credit card. You're using that credit card for authentication, not for payment. You say that you want Azure an Azure tenancy. It creates you an Azure tenancy, and in that tenancy, it creates you a directory, that's what it's called, this Azure Active Directory that you've created. In there, there's a domain, and the domain is called something like your email address .onmicrosoft.com. So something unique related just for you and your organization. And then that's there, and that's called your subscription tenancy or your billing tenancy. But you typically don't actually use that very much. So let's get rid of some of those things. There's us building the tenancy. What you are trying to vaguely mimic is the capabilities of Azure, of AD on-premise. And AD on-premise, you create domains, and then in the domains you create organizational units, and then you build group policies to manage the objects in those organizational units to make your organization work successfully. On cloud, you create subsequent, custom is the right term, directories and domains inside those directories. So here you can see in this detailed technical drawing, I've added a second domain there. That second domain now can have different users in, and therefore I can manage these two domains that are listed here on the slide differently, just like if I had organizational units and I had group policies managing those. So there's no such concept of organizational units in Azure AD. You basically sign up to Azure AD, you get a tenancy. In that tenancy, you then get a default domain, typically your email address .onmicrosoft.com. Then you create your own directory within that same tenancy. So you've already got one directory with one domain that's already there that you can't do anything about, other than that's the account who's your billing administrator. Then you add another directory, typically based on your company's name. So that would be called something like your company.onmicrosoft.com. And then from there to that directory, you can then add what they call custom domains, which are real domains that you own. So your company happens to be called your company, so you purchase the domain yourcompany.com. Well, you can then establish that domain, a domain called that name in Azure. And so in that case then, that guy there is your Azure AD. As you establish that domain, you typically have to prove to Microsoft that you own the name. So there's a little bit of DNS work you have to do. They'll say, okay, put this text file in DNS to prove that you own that DNS on the internet. You put the file in there, they poll it, make sure the file's there. Yeah, you own that DNS. So it'll then set up the domain called or whatever your domain that you've registered is, and from then you can start using it. So I don't know yet whether any of you have actually gone through this process. Most of you on the poll said that you were thinking about it. But what I then tend to get the question is, well, okay, so somebody, the organization has decided we need Azure AD we've implemented an Azure Tenancy subscription. In there, we've created a default, custom directory for our company, and in that custom directory, we've created a custom domain. And now the question is, what now? And so what now is basically you need to get typically I guess maybe actually there might be a question that says why. Basically, based on this drawing here, you have your users' accounts on-premise in Active Directory, and in your Active Directory you build applications, make those applications integrate with the user objects in Active Directory, and so those user objects can then access those applications. Typically, those applications, let's say old traditional Microsoft ones like Exchange, you have to implement mailbox servers and routers and hub transport servers, and configured edge transport servers to protect your environment. And was actually a lot of work in building systems on premise. Now, a lot of times in the modern world, these would have been virtual machines. So, you know, on premise is always a little bit of a strange term. But so you do a lot of work in building the applications, and you then enable your users to use it by putting them in the right groups or the right organizational units, so they have the right access to those applications, and then they can use them. On the cloud, the application is already provided. If I want to implement Office 365, Exchange Online, all I do is I have a user in the cloud and I give him a license. Okay, I don't have to implement any servers. I don't have to implement any policies. I can. I don't have to. I don't have to implement any protection on the edges of my network. All of that is already built and provided by Microsoft. All I have to do, give my user a license, and magically they then have access to the application, in this case Exchange. Also, lots of third parties have made applications that already can integrate with an Azure AD subscription. And so therefore I can go to companies like Salesforce or Box or Twitter, and I can say, yes, I'd like to use that application. I'd like my users in my organization to use that application. I don't have to install anything on premise. All I do is have the user who exists in the cloud, and I enable the application with 2 or 3, 4 or 5 clicks of a mouse, and magically the user has then, my users who I want to, then have access to that application. So what I've done is I've cut down a lot of the requirement for on-premise infrastructure, for a lot of the on-premise security, because we've got those 2 billion day authentications, and as we'll see in about 15 minutes, several other security options that I can enable on cloud in Azure Active Directory. Then what I'm going to end up with is an environment that is much more easy. It's much easier for me to enable the features that I want, and to give my users access to the application securely that they want. We always worry slightly when things are then off our premise, and we are no longer in control in the same way. But as we'll see, Microsoft provides us lots of security mechanisms to help us feel vaguely comfortable, much more comfortable with our data and our applications and our user information. So just going back one slide, remember that the problem is, okay, we've implemented it, so what now? Well, the answer is first, you need to have your identities in the cloud. So all the users that exist in Active Directory, maybe not all in one go, but slowly, you're going to want to move all of the users from Active Directory into Azure Active Directory. And the smallest companies can actually do that. It's a very quick switch over for small companies, 5, maybe 10 users. But when you're an enterprise and you've got thousands, or even tens of hundreds and then thousands and then tens of thousands of users, move them all to the cloud in one go is pretty much impossible. So we end up running what we call a hybrid Active Directory. which is still using on-premise Active Directory and using Azure Active Directory in the cloud. How we enable that hybrid is we somehow take our users, synchronize our users from the on-premise to the cloud. There's a tool that can do this, Microsoft providers, called Azure AD Connect, sometimes called AAD Connect, sometimes just called AD Connect. And this Azure AD Connect tool can do exactly that. You configure rules in the tool, and those rules enable you to say, I want these users from Active Directory to end up in this configuration in my Azure Active Directory domain that I have set up specific for me. Theoretically, I mean, strictly speaking, Azure AD Connect connects your directory. Your directory is can be split into one or more domains. You typically create a custom domain in your directory and then sync the users from AD on-prem to your domain in the cloud by using this Azure AD Connect tool. The nice thing about this tool is when it syncs a user from AD to Azure AD, it can even sync their passwords as well. More accurately, it can import the hash of the password from AD, then it rehashes it again and then sends it to the cloud. So it never really sends the password, but when somebody authenticates, then because the user is now in both places, the user can authenticate either against Active Directory using his password in the normal way, or against Azure. When he authenticates against Azure and supplies his password, Azure hashes and then hashes again the password, and of course, as long as that hashes match, then naturally that it must be the right password, and the user can, of course, log into Active Directory. So you need to install Azure AD Connect really to get things to work. I do know some organizations who use PowerShell scripts to get their users from on-premise AD to the cloud, but somehow you've got to get the users in the cloud, and the right tool is typically this Azure AD Connect. I don't know whether it's been made clear to you, but we at Oxford Computer Group, we run courses for helping our customers implement Azure and to help move to implement the Azure Active Directory Premium appropriately for their organization. And so we have an in-depth training course that shows you how to implement Azure AD Connect. In this webinar, I'm just basically saying you need something that's going to integrate your users. So if you want to know more, of course, you should look up our training course on the Azure AD Premium. So somehow you've got to sync users from AD to the cloud. This is one of the first and perhaps one of the difficult decisions to make is, do we just put Azure AD Connect in there and sync our users, including our passwords? A lot of organizations are uncomfortable or have policies that say, actually, we can't have passwords in the cloud, in which case it's possible to implement Active Directory to still sync the identities to the cloud, but then use federation, typically via ADFS, but it could be third-party federation tools as well, like Ping Federate or Shibboleth, that you can then federate the passwords back to the Active Directory. And what I mean by that is the user uses an appropriate portal to access their Active Directory account in Azure AD. They type in their username, they type in, and the username is going to be something like paul@oxfordcomputergroup.com. Azure will recognize that oxfordcomputergroup.com is a federated domain, and so it'll take the user's username, but the password it'll federate back to on-premise AD. So one of the big decisions that an organization has to make is, are they going to implement, have the hash of the password in the cloud, or are they going to implement federation? Again, our Azure AD Premium course shows you how to implement Azure AD Connect and how to implement ADFS to support this environment. Something like this. So what you would have to implement, and this is, I guess, you might think, well, this is the perfect solution. This in a hybrid environment, federating the user's password back to AD. It works something like this. So the user account is synced to Azure. Then the user uses an appropriate tool to attempt to access the system. The idea is that we've had to implement ADFS on premise. When you implement ADFS, it's a federation service. As you can see, we often call it STS, a secure token service. And when you implement it, you can then sit at that machine, run some Azure PowerShell that enables you to federate your Windows Azure Active Directory domain, that domain you've already created. You say that domain is going to be federated. When you do, Microsoft's on-cloud ADFS server needs to know about your on-premise ADFS server, and this concept of knowing about each other is called a federation trust. So a federation trust is established between Microsoft ADFS server and your on-premise federation server, because basically your server is going to create tokens that the Microsoft server has to consume. Okay, so one of the first choices is single sign-on, i.e. one password stored only in on-premise AD, and then federate that back. If you do that, as you can see, you need to do a little bit of extra configuration. Already, maybe AD Connect is an on-premise system that you've got to add, even though you're moving to the cloud. And this ADFS server is also most likely going to be on-premise, although they could be, both of them could be in VMs that you're hosting in Azure. But they're going to work like they're on-premise systems. Some organizations who say, no, we're not going to implement any more on-premise systems, they would say, okay, we're not going to use this ADFS capability, and we're just going to use the AD Connect with a password sync. For anyone who's already got federation servers in their on-premise environments, might typically use those to have the password federation working. So strictly speaking, we are only talking password federation here. There's another kind of federation. Federation servers can do sign-on to secure your sign-on options, but they can also provide authentication as well, so that, for example, it's possible to have an application perhaps in the cloud that uses federation as well. That might use Microsoft's federation, or there is one, and maybe more coming, that can also use your on-premise systems to federate back to as well. But in this case, I'm only talking about federation for signing on to your account in Azure AD. So there's a little bit of work to do if you're going to choose to have your ADFS in a hybrid environment. You might also have to implement a proxy server, and in that you also might have to configure DNS in what we call a split brain fashion, so that basically the way that it works is a computer tries to log on to an account in your Azure domain. The Azure domain says, no, you can't log on here without a token from my ADFS server. So he basically redirects the client to Microsoft's ADFS server. Microsoft ADFS server says, I can give you a token to access your Azure account, to be your Azure password, but you have to prove who you are first by giving me a token that comes from your domain. Okay. So he then basically redirects the user back to his on-premise ADFS. When the user gets to his on-premise ADFS, his on-premise ADFS can then prove who he is via AD, send the token back to the user. The user then supplies that token back to Microsoft's federation server, and finally, Microsoft's federation server then can send the information back to the client that Azure AD needs. Now, I know that was a complicated process. I hope you got a vague understanding of what's going on. In that communication, the client never once, the ADFS servers never once spoke to each other. The only time they really need to speak to each other is when they're establishing that federation trust. Once it's established, then all of the communication goes via the user's computer and typically uses industry standard protocols such as OAuth or WS-Fed. Those, as long as your ADFS, the federation server, should I say, understands those industry standard protocols, then you can use it. Okay, so I don't want to go too much further into ADFS other than to say it is a choice. I'm just going back a slide. You have a choice when you implement AD of either manually adding your users to Azure AD. It can be a bit of a pain when you've got 10,000 users. You can use Azure AD Connect to sync them, and when you have made that choice to use Azure AD Connect or PowerShell to sync them, then you're also going to have the decision of whether you should sync the passwords or implement federation. In our being Oxford Computer Group's AADP course, we actually implement all of this, and you can see this quite clearly working, and just to see how to set it up. But okay, so the first problem was what now? And the first answer is get your users into the cloud. Why? Because then when they're in the cloud, they can be managed. They can be managed via a few different portals. I'm hoping you can see my Internet Explorer here. I've pointed this system at, or maybe I'll point it somewhere else. Let's see, we'll go to portal.office.com. This is one of the portals that you can use to manage your Azure tenancy. Notice that I've pointed there, it has some default configuration options. I can then supply my username and password. There's my username. As I supply my username, did you notice that it switched the branding to my own company's branding? Now, obviously, this is a bit of a silly EMS training bitmap, but one of the important things that you need to do early on in your implementation is make Azure AD look like yours. So as you can see, you can brand the system so that it works properly. Here, sorry, not that it works properly, so that it looks like your implementation. As you do, so just me typing in the username with the in this case, ocglearning630.com on the end, enabled my system to know that it was me and from my domain and supplied my branding. Then I supply my password, and what I've done is I've secured my system in an appropriate way. And you'll notice as I supply my password, although I'm strongly of the opinion that it's about time we weren't using passwords anymore, and I think the world is slowly moving that way. And I've configured my system so that when I supply my password, it's going to do what I think it should really have done anyway, and that's actually call me on my mobile phone. I don't know whether you can hear this. Here's me answering my mobile phone.
Using Microsoft sign-in verification system. Please press the hash key to finish your verification.
So there I have pressed the hash key. Oops, I also pressed close after I pressed the hash key. I hope it took it. But you can see without me touching the screen, it then completed my authentication and has signed me in. I think this is, of course, much more secure than me remembering my password, and therefore I don't have to worry about service password resets or anything like this. Of course, it means I have to have my mobile phone with me, but I don't think I've seen a teenager, especially not my teenagers, without their mobile phone surgically attached to their hands for quite a long time. So in the future, you know, everybody will have these things right in front of them. But from here, as an admin, so first of all, the tiles I see here are the applications that are made available to me via Office 365. To make the applications available to me, somebody has gone to my domain and just said, yep, I want that person to have that license, and magically these applications appear. But you'll also notice I've got this admin tile. Not everybody would get that, only people who are, of course, admins. And when I click this admin tile, I can use this Office 365 Admin Center to configure such things as giving users licenses. So for here, I can see, for example, all the users in my organization who have been synced with Azure AD Connect, and I've decided I want Ali Huff here to have a license. I select her, I edit the licenses. Got a little thing on my screen in the way, excuse me a second. I edit the licenses, and I can, first of all, I'm going to have to select the location. I'm in the UK. And notice here I can now say, yeah, Ali now has this license, and I want her to be able to use these apps. These are the Office 365 licenses, and I can assign it, and I can give her all the apps. So I can say, oh yeah, I don't want her to have what do I not want to have? Sway, or Microsoft Teams, or Microsoft Forms, but I do want her to have these applications. So there's no implementation of anything in my system. I just choose the right licenses, and of course I could have done that with PowerShell if I wanted to assign licenses to lots of people, or I can create groups and assign the people to the license by them being in the right group, and magically that user Arlene, when she next logs in, will have those applications available to her when she goes to portal.office.com. So this is one of the big selling points, is no need for any or very little on-premise infrastructure to make this work. Microsoft provide basically all the things that I need. So if I'm going to implement Azure, first thing I think is, yes, I need to do my branding. Second of all, I need to know how to assign applications to my users. You saw with the Office applications, I just went to portal.office.com and assigned them. What about applications from third parties? Well, there's another portal here called portal.azure.com. Let's point a browser there. And you can see that when I do, give me 1 second, I was expecting it to do partial authentication then. Learning 630demo.com. You know, I said 250 milliseconds before your attention goes away. I don't know whether your attention went away when I was typing in that username there. Password. Secret, of course, and naturally it's calling me back.
Thank you for using Microsoft sign-in verification system. Please press the hash key to finish your verification. Your sign-in was successfully verified.
So you can see I signed in successfully, I'm verified, and now I'm looking at the Azure portal. From here, I can now do other things. So there's really two main admin portals. The Office 365 portal, where I manage my users and the licenses that I want to give them to run Microsoft's Office 365 applications. And here in the Azure portal, I've got lots of various things that I can do. I can set up virtual machines. I can configure my system and a whole bunch of security features that I can hopefully show you in 5 more minutes. But I can also get to my directory, and I can add other applications that my users can use. So notice if I take enterprise applications here, and I go say that I want to add a new application to my integrate a new application into my environment. Lists here a whole bunch of application types that I might want to do. In this case, I'm just going to randomly choose something. Notice as I choose e-commerce, it says, oh, is this an application that belongs to you, or as in one you're developing, or is it an application that doesn't exist in the gallery, or are you just trying to use one of these applications that are in the gallery already? And you'll notice that I can then, I don't know what this gap application does, it's slightly scary, but notice I can then add this into my environment, and then if I want my users to be able to use it, I can now here assign who can use it, how they should prove who they are. With these applications, that there are several different ways that you can authenticate your users, but maybe I'm just going to say I want to use federation, or I might say I want to use a single user account for everybody in my organization. Maybe we have a shared Twitter account or something like that, or I might say let users use their own individual accounts. I can choose these options from here on this application, and again, in this case, let's just say that I want to configure which users and groups can use this application, and notice I can just add user, find any of the users from my organization. Typically, I would find a group, of course, but in my demonstration, I'm just going to show you adding a single user. Let's use this person right here, and I choose select. And how much hardware did I have to implement? How much configuration did I have to do? Almost nothing. Basically, click, 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 and sign, and then magically that user, when they next log on, will see a tile that they can click to enable them to run that application. So, like I said, there are a few different ways that you can enable those applications, or the single sign-on to those applications. And again, on our training course, obviously, we go into detail on all of those. So this is why we have Azure, because A, I can brand it for my organization. That's typically the first thing I do. Well, or actually, the first thing I do is I create directories and domains. Then I sync my users there, choosing or not whether I'm going to have passwords or hashes of the passwords in the cloud, or whether I'm going to use federation. Then I enable the licenses for those users to use Microsoft applications, or I configure enterprise applications. And I don't know whether you noticed, but in the gallery, when I was going to add applications, there are nearly 3,000 applications in the gallery. Almost any application you've ever heard of is right there. Great. So that you might use this capability to, of course, easily give your users access to the applications. And I'm sure with a little bit of extrapolation and a little bit of thought, you can say, okay, it does make sense that we do this because we no longer need to implement things on premise to enable us to gain access to the applications that we need. But, and here's the big but, what about security? We always worry about the security of our data and our identities when they're off our premise. So the choice is that we could, of course, secure our premise with good old-fashioned firewalls, or we might choose to implement things on cloud, and we can see why. They're much easier to implement, and they're quite easy to manage when you get used to using these portals. But what about security? So what I have here is another poll I'm supposed to launch. So give me a second to launch that. This poll is about whether or not you're using any, if you are using Azure ADP. I know most of you said you were planning to, but if you're using any of these, well, it would be interesting to know if you are. And any of these I'm talking about are really MFA, multi-factor authentication, conditional access, where I can set up individual access to individual applications based on various features. There's a thing called PIM, privileged identity management, and there's a security option called risk policies. I don't know if you've heard of any of these tools, but my plan is to give you a quick run through of these little tools right now. So I don't have much time left, but I'm going to try to do it at an appropriate speed. Okay, so let's return to my slides. Okay. So remember I said one of the first thing you do is you brand your system. There's a little couple of slides here about how you customize that branding, and you change it so that you can you change the branding so that your users feel comfortable that it's your organization, not anyone else's. Just one thing on this slide we're looking at. I don't know whether you can see, but when you implement this bitmap and it has to make the bitmap smaller to fit on screens, it always kind of squishes it up to the top left. So company logos, although we've put it bottom left here, the right place for the company logo is always top left, or something company specific, because if it's going to squish it up, that's the way that the interface squishes it up. So one of the first things you do when you get your tenancy is configure the branding. Very briefly, and trying to be very brief, something like this. So here we are looking at the directory, and you notice I've got this company branding here, and you can see that I can edit this, and I can do it per language, but I can upload the appropriate bitmaps and colors and whatever I need here. And you can see that I've done this by uploading this EMS training bitmap that I just showed you. So company branding first, typically, and then applications, as I've already shown you, either by just enabling licenses in Office 365, and then users can use the Office 365 portal to launch their applications, or, and this is what the Office 365 portal looks like. I showed you the different tiles that users can click, and your Office 365 apps will just appear like that. In that portal, by the way, they can change the look and feel of the portal itself. So again, it feels like they're using their own software. But of course, when we're implementing this in organizations, we spend a lot of time helping them the organizations write the appropriate documents and posters that they place around saying Office 365 is coming, here's how we're going to implement it, here's what it's going to look like, here's what you're going to see. You have to do a little bit of that kind of training for your users. But then they stop even noticing whether they're on premise or on cloud when they're using applications. They just click the tiles, and the application that we've given them a license for will be available. Okay. Other mechanisms we've got for security is MFA. MFA technically stands for multi-factor authentication, but Microsoft's multi-factor authentication was a company called PhoneFactor that they purchased, and really means via a mobile phone. And as you saw when I logged in, I've got MFA configured. So I've got my username and password. But after I typed my password in, it phoned me back to prove who I was. At least it doesn't really prove who I am. I guess it proves I've got that admin's mobile phone, which I guess is a start. But when you first enable it, the user has to register their mobile phone as their authentication device. And then when the user then, as you can see here, makes an access to Azure, Azure will call the cloud MFA, phone the user back, and of course the user can get in. It's also possible with MFA for when a user accesses a cloud app, that the cloud app can also call MFA. So you might configure one of these applications that with the technical term is step up. It might have step up MFA that it'll then phone you back before you can use it. And again, of course, on our Azure AD Premium training course, we implement this, set it up, see it all working. What you basically do is you create your own, for part of the course, Azure Tenancy, create your own domains, which of course you can keep forever. And we use those to set up all of the security features, including MFA, to make that work. So if I wanted to configure some of my users to use MFA, I can do it from my portal. When I choose users and groups, and perhaps look at my users. I don't know whether you can see this clearly here, but in the portal, I can enable multi-factor authentication by clicking that button, and it then enables me to set up which users are going to be enforced to use MFA, like my account was, or whether it's disabled or just enabled, and then users can choose whether or not to use it. Under service settings as well, in your MFA, you can say that if people are in specific IP address ranges, then they don't have to use MFA. So you can skip MFA if you're in your office, but if you're connecting up from home, then you might port MFA. So there's lots of different configuration options that you can enable to secure the authentication process by using that multi-factor authentication. So that's one of the big features that Microsoft provide. And there's a slide, of course, showing you how to enable that. The next important security feature, and what we try to do for these next 3 features I'm going to describe to you, I'm only going to describe them in 2 minutes because I've only got 10 minutes left before I'm supposed to shut up, which is difficult for me to shut up. There's 3 more features: conditional access, PIM, which is privileged identity management, and risk policies. And what we try to do is make, although they're 3 separate entities, we try to make our customers think of them as a whole. But the only way to introduce them is to introduce them separately. So the first one we're going to look at is conditional access. And conditional access is something you can do per application, something like this. So if I go back to my system, close that guy down. Okay, so what was I doing? Conditional access, yes. So conditional access is per application. So here in my portal, I can choose that I want to manage my enterprise applications, where I just enabled that application for us to use. You'll notice when I'm on the applications page, I've got this option called conditional access. And then from here, I can create policies that work per application. So I can create a new policy like this, and I can say that this policy is called, I don't know what it's called, maybe it's called Twitter policy. And I can say that for all users, for example, this policy is about a specific cloud app, specifically on the assumption, I think I added Twitter to my list of applications. I think I did. It's searching. Okay. It's always when you're trying to rush to get things finished in 5 minutes before people shout at you for being too late. There we go. So I've got Twitter installed 7 times. So I choose Twitter, say select, and done. So I've basically said all users, when they use Twitter, and I can say if they are using a iOS device and Windows Phone or Windows, maybe I'll say if they're using Windows, from this particular location, but I'll just say all locations in this particular instance, and are they using it via a browser or via a mobile app? I'll say via a browser. Then I can then choose whether to grant them access to the application, or I can say require multi-factor authentication when they use that application, or I can say they're only allowed to do this with a domain joined device. And so I can create policies, as you can see. And the idea is, with these conditional access policies, that I can, based on various factors, say if someone's allowed to use an application. And I could choose, as you vaguely saw in that policy, to allow somebody who met that criteria to use the application, or to block somebody if they don't meet those criteria, or if they do meet that particular criteria, then to do step-up MFA. And per application, I can create these options to make sure that only the right people with the right devices from the right location can access my applications. So conditional access enables me to do that per application. And I also have this, these things called user risk policies. And these user risk policies are assigned to a user account. And I can, this is not part of conditional access, this is part of the risk policies. And so with those risk policies, I can say, oh, that particular user is at risk. So I can say, if the user's at risk and they're accessing Office, then I want to block them. Or before they're allowed to access Office, they've got to securely change their password, or something like that. Now, how do I know a user's at risk? Well, I'll discuss that with you in 2 seconds. There's one other security feature. So really what I was discussing there was conditional access. There's another security feature called PIM, which is Privileged Identity Management. With this, I take all my admin roles, like I've got a global admin or user admin or a password admin, and instead of giving those roles to people like I do normally, so I normally say that user is a global admin, what I'll say is that user is eligible to be a global admin. And then when that user wants to do global admin tasks, he starts the global admin task. The global admin role then kicks in. And the global admin role has, when I'm configuring PIM, has a time to live, has a link to say whether or not that I would alert other administrators that somebody was using this role. I've got an option to say MFA, so the role has to phone me back before I can use it. So what PIM gives me is no administrators. The idea is, of course, that if I hack into your account by using social engineering and I steal your account actually doesn't have any privileges, even though you might be a global administrator, because actually you're not a global administrator till you actually ask for it. And when you do, this appropriate authentication and authorization takes place, and only then can you actually use that role. And you can only get that role for however long we specify. You can specify 72 hours, you can specify an hour. I don't know however long those individual roles you would expect people to be able to use. So PIM, Privileged Identity Management, is a feature of Azure AD Premium. There are cheaper versions of Azure AD that don't include these security features, but Azure AD Premium includes conditional access and PIM that you can configure. There's a couple of slides here talking about PIM setup, but I'm running out of time, so I'm just going to skip over those and mention the final security feature that Azure gives us, Azure AD Premium gives us, and this is identity protection. And identity protection of those risk policies. Again, to cut a kind of long story short, if Microsoft, of course, do 2 billion authentications a day and get familiar with patterns of access to the systems that are considered risky. Okay, so if they see those risky accesses, like impossible travel to atypical locations, 1 hour ago you're in Brazil, now you're in London. Well, it's not possible to get from Brazil to London in an hour. Therefore, something is wrong with your identity possibly being compromised. Azure will flag it as at risk. So I can then create these risk policies to say that if somebody is at a low risk, then they can use my resources and access my applications. If they're at medium risk, then we have to use MFA before they're allowed to use the applications. And if they're at high risk, then we will block them from using the applications. And you can create these policies where you can say whether or not a user policy you want to apply to that user, whether they're at low, medium, or high risk. Okay, I feel like I rushed through some of that, and I do apologize. But what I'm hoping I've given you is a little flavor of the kind of things that when you implement Azure for an enterprise that you have to consider. So we're talking about how you're going to sync the users, how they're going to log in, how how you're going to secure them, how you're going to enable the applications, of course, how you're going to secure your identities, and there we were talking NFA or conditional access or PIM or risk policies. And what we at Oxford Computer Group do is we have of course, we have consultants who can help organizations when they are attempting to implement Azure AD. Our consultants are available, basically, all of my slides say www.oxfordcomputergroup somewhere on them, but either that or you can access our consultants via the Twitter or LinkedIn to search for them. So we provide consultancy to help organizations when they do this implementation, and we can provide training. We have an awesome training course, 3 days, of course. I say of course, it was of course, but 3 days where we will show you in reasonable depth each one of those options and give you good reasons as to why you may or may not, why you should, or maybe you shouldn't implement those things. A lot of people say, well, I don't need a course. You either enable the feature or you don't. Well, that's true. But if you enable the feature, what is the long-term, what could be the long-term hazards if you enable it wrong in the first place? And so we get, of course, lots of people through that training course. Everybody loves it. I hope that we might even see some of you guys coming to have a look at that course, and of course contacting Oxford Computer Group for consultancy to help your implementation of Azure AD. I've got one more poll I'm supposed to give you, those of you who are still here and still awake. Oh, and this was a poll about our training course. So I don't know whether any of you guys would be interested in attending our training course, but like I said, we go into great depth on any one of those features, not any one, all of those features, and you can see on the slide here some responses from some of the students who have looked at it, have attended it, sorry. And I'm also, before I let you guys go, supposed to encourage you to ask some questions, although I was supposed to leave myself time to answer them. And I haven't really, but the plan is that what I'm going to do is, if we don't get time to answer these questions because I've overrun slightly, then I will get somebody at Oxford Computer Group to gather these questions and respond to you via email. So there's a question there from Vishal. Do we get the presentation in our email ID? I don't see why not. I will make sure, Vishal, that somebody contacts you and gets you what you need. Okay, I don't see why not. But I don't know for sure. I don't know if any of you other guys, any of the other folks want to ask me any questions. Sorry I went on so long. People always say it's difficult to stop me talking when I get going. So as far as I'm concerned, if there are no more questions, I've got nothing else to talk to you guys about. So I guess we're drawing to the end of the webinar. I'm just pausing in a way to leave anybody to ask questions if you want to. Nobody has. So remember, great question. The answer is at the moment, no, Vishal, but if you requested one, can you see at the bottom there's the URL on the slide here about the course? Then you can make that work. And yes, sorry, yes, you'll be able to click that link, see where our courses are scheduled, but also on there we have a guy called Mark Forbes, who is our training coordinator, and if you smiled at him enough and perhaps waved enough cash at him, I'm sure he would somehow arrange to enable that. For example, I'm going to teach this course in the US Virgin Islands tomorrow. Strictly speaking, the course starts on Monday. So we do run these courses for other people. So Jay gave me a question. Is PIM only with Azure AD? The answer is yes, Jay. PIM is an Azure AD feature, and strictly speaking, it's Azure AD Premium as well. But there is an on-premise version that's similar, but of course nowhere near as sexy, and that's called PAM, Privileged Access Management. But that requires quite a bit of on-premise configuration. But PIM is reasonably easy to set up, and yes, it is an Azure AD Premium feature. Jay has also asked, if you use AD Connect and ADFS, will PIM work as well? Yes, Jay, it definitely will. So PIM is about identifying users who exist in your Azure AD Premium tenancy and saying what roles they have in that tenancy. So whether they're just user admins or global admins or what they are. Yes, they definitely work with ADFS. So ADFS is kind of a way of proving who you are, but PIM will definitely work once you've proved who you are, because it's a completely different feature. But yes, so the answer is yes. So Martin says, do you have any webinars on PAM? Yes, Martin, we do have webinars on PAM. So I can't give you more detail because I don't know any more detail, but we have our whole marketing team looking at these questions, and I'm sure that somebody will get back to you with a whole list of webinars. And we even have a PAM course as well, by the way, which is a one-day course that shows you how to implement PAM. Remember, PAM is on-premise, but it does the similar features that PIM does, which is basically having your admin roles, instead of anybody having been granted an admin role, you're just granted eligible for an admin role. And it basically takes everybody out of your groups, like for example the enterprise admin group, removes all your users from there, and then your users can get temporarily granted those permissions by being granted these roles that, like PIM, have times to live and authorization features. So yes, we absolutely do have webinars on PAM, and although I can't give you any details, I promise our marketing people can and will, Martin, because they'll see all these questions. And we'll get to you hopefully today, if not tomorrow. Hang on, what is it? Is it Thursday? Yeah. So if not today, then tomorrow. Yes, I presume we have your email. Just trying to open up this little dialog box. Okay, so I presume you have your email, and I can see actually somebody has answered sure thing already. So that's probably our marketing people who are already ready to send that to you. Okay. Okay. Actually, Vishal's left. It's already gone. I was going to say somebody has also prompted that the course can be attended via Skype. So actually, Vishal could have been in India and we could be in the UK still teaching the course, as long as one of us is awake at the right time. Yeah, we do run courses like that. Okay. Does anybody else want to talk to me? Leave me any questions? The questions will possibly be open for a little bit longer But if there's nothing else for me, then thank you very much for your attention. Those of you that are still here, well done on staying awake for me rushing through those options. But like I said, we do provide consultancy and training to help you or anybody that requires help with implementing Azure, and of course plenty of advice on anything